evening. I'm Al Simpson, the director of the Institute of Politics for 4 more days. And then to hell with, it's been a great experience, and the great experience is having forums like this evening. And on behalf of the Boston Gay Pride Committee, the Kennedy School's Gay and Lesbian Caucus, and the Institute of Politics, I welcome you to tonight's event. I want to thank 2 people who were instrumental in organizing this event this evening. First is Andre Davis, the Pride 2000 coordinator, and the second is my friend and co-worker, Christian Flynn. Christian is here, I know, and Andre, there you are. Nice to have you both. And Christian serves here at the Institute as the Director of Special Projects and does a tremendous job, and will be here with my successor, former Senator David Pryor, and a wonderful member of the staff. So tonight we're going to join to discuss a topic that only 12 years ago in political campaigns, candidates were not only wary to discuss, but plain fearful sometimes to discuss. And why are we now discussing the impact of the gay vote at this time? Have we as a society become more tolerant and more mature? Well, that's questionable. The real reasons may have less to do with idealistic motives. Some argue that the new prominence of gay issues in Campaign 2000 has to do with power and money. Politicians understand those 2 terms in the richest possible form. Power, because more people are openly identifying themselves as gay. In the 1996 presidential election, 5% of all voters identified themselves as gay. That's 5 million people. And that does not include hundreds of thousands, millions more who decline to identify themselves as gay. That is power. And add to that a statistically somewhat more affluent constituency, and you have a constituency that will be heard. In 1992, right here at the Kennedy School of Government, President Bill Clinton was the first presidential candidate ever to discuss gay issues. It was here that in response to a questioner, Bill Clinton said that gays should be able to serve openly in the military. But given the wrath he faced during his first term on this issue, which was his first issue of his first term, some would say the country wasn't ready. Maybe he wasn't ready, the administration, but in any event, it was a very controversial time. Now in Campaign 2000, we have had gay issues more prominently discussed, and not just with those of the other faith, Democrats, we call them. The other faith. We still heard the anti-gay bigotry in this election from Alan Keyes and Pat Buchanan. We've witnessed Senator John McCain meeting with the log cabin Republicans, and there have been some more sensitive pronouncements from the camp of George W. Bush. And I think that's very important. There was even a question of having a litmus test on gays in the military and as to the choice of chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And of course, that was received and stridently debated for a time. My awareness of the log cabin Republicans, this fine gentleman asked me to speak to their group several years ago, 5, 6, but through a man in California, Frank Ricciazzi. I remember, it's a good Italian name, Ricciazzi. I wish I could spell it, Ricciazzi. I did spell it. He asked asked me one day, I was chairman of the Committee on Immigration and Refugee Policy. He took me through his work, and he said, how about the Log Cabin Republicans? And I said, what's that? What group is that? And he said, I don't know, but you're going to speak to them. I said, sure. He said, will you do that? I said, I will. And I did. And my staff said, what are you doing? I said, I want to speak to them because we got to work them over on the abortion issue. Because I'm pro-choice, and I said I want to speak to them about the necessity of all good Republicans trying to be pro-choice, or at least recognizing that it's a deeply intimate and personal decision. There's where I met Frank. There's where I met Rich. Then my most remarkable staff person, Lori Berleffi Rosen. Her sister, Bobby Berleffi, is gay. And that was a very interesting thing for her because she is from Cheyenne, Wyoming. And in visiting with Bobby, who I'd known all of her life, there was a new awareness for me with regard to that, a very important thing for me. And finally, the Matthew Shepard horror happened at the alma mater of Anne, who sits back there, a remarkable woman. We went to the University of Wyoming, and we were appalled. And these two butchers were not students at the University of Wyoming, please recall, and they both were given about the heaviest of sentences, and it should have been. But they asked me to speak at the west front of the Capitol at the vigil, and I did so. I was very proud to do so, to tell people that Wyoming people are not homophobic, and that this was a dastardly and horrible thing for us, as it was for the world. And this young man, this beautiful young man, is buried in the soil of Wyoming. His parents, his father went to the University of Wyoming, was a roommate of Anne's, the man that married Anne's cousin. So those are the awarenesses that come to all people, all thoughtful people in life. So tonight we bring together two people engaged in this debate at the highest levels of the political process. Rich Tafel is the founder and the executive director of the Log Cabin Republicans. This is the nation's largest gay and lesbian Republican organization. Rich is also an ordained American Baptist minister. Jeff Trammell, who I met coming off the plane this morning and then had a visit with since, is the senior managing director at Hill & Knowlton Public Affairs, serves as a senior policy advisor on gay issues for Vice President Al Gore. Jeff has served in key positions in the House and Senate and has been involved in every Democratic presidential campaign since 1976. With that, gentlemen, I believe you decided, without flipping a coin, that you would go first. And we'll have 5 to 10 minutes from each of the panelists, and then we will go to questions. Thank you very much for being with us.
Well, it's an honor to be here at Senator Simpson's last forum. A great hero of mine, and your picture speaking at the Log Cabin Republicans in 1995 hangs in my office because that was a great moment for us. We had the same event a couple weeks ago. John McCain was there, and we had so many members of Congress wanting to come, we had to turn people away. And there were many media and cameras there, and one of the members of Congress said, you know, I used to come to this event when you guys were unpopular. I came here when you had people peeked in the door first before they came in. Before they always asked who else was speaking. He said, "You've become downright trendy," and which is sort of funny and not exactly true. But Senator Simpson was definitely one of those pioneers that came. At that time, it was a very controversial thing, and I'm sure his staff did say, "Senator, why are you going to that group? This can be nothing but horrible. You know, you'll get people angry at you." And he came, and it was great. And I guess the earth didn't, stop spinning. But it was a great event for us. So it's a real honor to be here with him, somebody who I think personally holds the values of the Republican Party that I also hold. And people ask, how can you be a Republican at times? And it's people like Senator Simpson that we all point to and talk about who have those values of the party of Lincoln and why I do what I do, fighting for gay rights within the Republican Party. And I'm also glad to be with Jeff Trammell, who's a friend And I know Jeff because he was also the chair of the Victory Fund, which elects openly gay candidates, and he's been very, as chairman of that, and he's still on the board, he was instrumental in helping elect a lot of openly gay Republican candidates around the country, which we're really grateful at Log Cabin. So glad to be here with both of you, and it's nice to be back at Harvard University, where I went to divinity school and took courses here at the Kennedy School, and took a course in this classroom, actually. Though I couldn't find it this time coming back, so I guess I'm getting old. What I thought, in speaking of the impact of the gay vote, I think the 4-year cycles of presidential politics give us some pulse of where the gay community is in American politics, and Senator Simpson alluded to that in his opening comments. I was here at a forum in 1988 when Congressman Barney Frank was selling those listening that the gay community must vote for Michael Dukakis. And there was a lot of opposition to that at the time because Michael Dukakis had recently before that taken a child out of a homosexual couple's away. They took a child away from a gay couple and put it to a straight couple's home. And ironically and sadly, the child was molested actually in the other home where it was moved, and the state courts moved in and it was changed. But it was a different world then, and it was a tough sell also at the time because Dukakis, then meeting with Tim McFeely, then the head of the Human Rights Campaign, when asked why he wouldn't support a gay rights bill, said because it's immoral. Homosexuality is immoral. And that was the Democratic candidate in 1988. And of course, the Republican candidate, there was nothing even on the radar screen in the Republican Party on gay issues, and it was a hard sell. And I remember one of Dukakis' advisors at the time saying that, protesters are going to follow you all around the country, gay protesters, because of your positions on adoption. And I remember his advisor saying, that's not going to hurt us in Iowa. So in 1988, that was the state of affairs. That's not that long ago, 12 years ago. By 92, we really saw the dramatic divergence, also referenced in the opening comments, and that was where not only did Bill Clinton say, positive things to the gay and lesbian community or address them at all, it was quite a difference than Michael Dukakis, but the Republican Party, George Bush Sr., if referred to him now, at the time, was suffering within his own party. He had increased taxes, and there were people upset about that. And so what he did, I don't believe he is a social conservative, but he basically gave his campaign over to many in the rising religious right in the Republican Party. And so if any of you remember the 1992 convention, which many pundits at the time said the speeches were better in the original German, you had people like Pat Buchanan and Pat Robertson in prime time, Ronald Reagan being pushed off into late hours. And I was at that convention, and there was anti-gay signs being held up in the crowd, and there was the Pat Buchanan speech sort of, I think, stuck in everybody's mind who was there. He said, there's a culture war, we're going to take it back block by block from, and listed all the horrible groups, and the gay community was chief culprit in that. That was, I think, the moment that many gay Republicans, I think it led, actually, we can thank Pat Buchanan for creating a log cabin Republican office in that speech. Because many gays who had worked in the Republican Party for years, and Jeff, having worked on the Hill, knows there's tons of gays working on the Hill in the Republican Party, always felt that it was a don't ask, don't tell policy, and if they didn't say anything, the party would be cool with it. And what they were starting to realize with the rise of social conservatives in the Republican Party, many, I have to point out, coming from the Democratic Party over the last 15 to 20 years, we're really changing the dynamics of our party. And it was a pretty frightening election, and we saw the gay community aligned for the first time really in a presidential cycle, because the gay community voted something like 85% for Bill Clinton in those numbers, and Bush did very poorly. By 96, we saw that President Clinton had some successes and some failures with the gay and lesbian community. I think gay Democrats were pretty happy with him. But Bob Dole, had an education himself with the famous Dole check incident, where he sought campaign money from log cabin Republicans. We went to many of his events. We knew him as a senator and worked closely with him, had a good relationship with him. Everything was positive. And I went to an event, and I said, I'm going to come on a PAC check, which means it will be recorded, so you're aware of that. And the campaign said, fine. And what happens, but 5 months later, when Dole is hurting in Iowa against social conservatives, a campaign manager says, when called by a reporter, how'd you get that check, says, we're returning it. We never solicited it. They snuck it in here. And so we basically had a war of words with the Dole campaign, with personal correspondence being flashed on ABC News back and forth, each calling the other side a liar, unfortunately. But what's interesting is by the end of that campaign, the Dole campaign came back to Log Cabin, sought the endorsement of the organization, made commitments on the executive policy, AIDS funding, and so forth. And it was, ironically, a very positive experience. And that doesn't get reported very often, but Senator Dole, in that presidential race, raised the level for Republican candidates in the presidency. And now, what's amazing to me in the year 2000 election is that the Democrats are aggressively going for the gay vote and aggressively criticizing Republicans for anything that they feel is slightly anti-gay. That's very telling. For one, I don't think Democrats do much without polling. So what they're looking at is that the gay community is now a winning issue, and that's very good news. The other thing is, for the first time, they must fear that the gay community is being competed for, which is unusual among a lot of groups, which are core Democrat groups. You don't see the Democratic Party, going aggressively and fighting for a lot of groups that are perceived to be in the back pocket of the Democratic Party, as I think the gay community has been. But I think that the Democratic Party has seen that the gay community votes 1/3 to 25 to 33% vote Republican. And that's the largest of any minority group in the country, and it rivals, the only group like that is the Hispanic community. And you'll notice two candidates running for president, both stepping over themselves, speaking Spanish, fighting for the community. So the gay community, I think, in the impact of this vote that's coming, this election, is we become, I think, we're a mainstream issue. George W. Bush, we've had at Log Cabin, I can go into more details during questions, I think it'd be more interesting, but we've had an antagonistic relationship with George W. Bush. There's no doubt about that. But what was interesting to me was Super Tuesday, when George W. Bush was winning, Bush had said that he would meet with gay Republicans. And what reporters were saying was Bush is moving to the middle by an agreement to meet with gays. The gays were being defined by the middle. And Pat Robertson, in criticizing the Bush campaign for doing any outreach to the gay community, said George W. Bush should not wander to the center in meeting with gays. So we've shifted the gay community from a perspective of being a left-wing fringe group in the Democratic Party, as it was perceived years ago, to now, at the mainstream of American politics, gay Republicans are perceived as mainstream. And in fact, the truth is, we are. Gay Republicans, for example, who are Republican because they believe in less government, free markets, individual rights, individual responsibility, strong military, and they really see individual rights as including gay individuals, are right at the middle of the American public. That is where the moderate Republican swing voters are, conservative Democrats, and independents. So the coalition that is developing, I think, for the gay and lesbian community this election is a coalition with the swing vote. And I think that's why we're getting so much attention, because there's so many other people who care to see how gays are treated. I think just 5% of the vote is not that interesting. And the fact that, when you're fighting in the Republican Party, it's even more difficult. When you're 1/3 of that 5% and the opposition to gay rights is almost entirely in your Republican Party primary, it makes the challenge more difficult. But it's the coalition that you built beyond your 5%. And I think that's what's happened this election cycle, is that the gay and lesbian community is basically the definition of tolerance. How you treat gays is, are you a tolerant, inclusive person? And that's a very good position to be politically, and I think that will play out this election cycle. I'll leave the rest for question and answers, because I want to keep the speaking time short.
Thank you very much, Rich. And Jeff, please.
Thank you. First, let me express my gratitude for being here with you this evening. And let me just say that being here with Alan Simpson is particularly a privilege. Those of us who were congressional staffers miss him. We miss his humor and his intelligence, neither of which there's never enough of in Washington. And it's a real privilege. And Rich Tafel has been a friend for many years. I've long admired the fact that Rich fights a good fight. He's willing to be out there in the wilderness fighting day in and day out. And I know that he has it a lot tougher than those of us who are Democrats do, and I admire him for his perseverance and his commitment. And also, I have to say that meeting Jack Spong is a particular pleasure of mine. He's someone that we all have admired for years, and Jack, the fact that you've shown that people of faith can be honest about their sexual orientation is extremely important to our community, and we appreciate that. Let me start by saying that I think this is a watershed year. I think we have become respectable, or at least we're in the process of becoming respectable in American politics. And I want to talk for just a minute about where we have been, where we are today, and where I think we're going. Of course, there have been gay and lesbian Americans since the beginning of the country. One of the interesting little footnote here, there was I'm an alumnus of, not of this distinguished institution, but one that came a little later, William and Mary, down in Virginia. And our Alumni Association raised some money recently, the Gay and Lesbian Alumni Association did, for a collection of books on gays and lesbians for the William and Mary Library. And we searched for a name, and one of the history graduate students came up with the idea of naming it the Richard Cornish Collection. And we all said, well, who is that? We'd never, thought we knew a lot about colonial history. Well, Richard Cornish was the first person executed for sodomy in the New World in Jamestown in about 1625. And when he was discovered to have had a homosexual relationship in Jamestown. So I thought that was an appropriate, all of us thought that was an appropriate name for the collection there at the college. And I point that out as a way of saying that obviously there have been gay and lesbian Americans from the beginning, and the fact that we are finally being honest about who we are is remarkable. And I think that as Rich pointed out earlier, if you look at how far we've come over the course of the last few years, it's breathtaking. As recently as 1992, the wedge issue was in the other direction. The way you won votes from mainstream America was by accusing someone of being soft on homosexuality or believing in some sort of preferential treatment. And a mere 8 years later, the wedge seems to be working in the other way. It seems to be that, as Rich pointed out, that your position on gay issues, your tolerance, is almost a metaphor for your social issues generally. And so the Bush campaign felt the need to show that they were not so intolerant, that they wouldn't meet with gays and lesbians within their own party. They happened to pick the wrong group to meet with within their own party, but that's a different subject. So, first of all, let's recognize the fact that the world has changed dramatically. It's changed for a number of reasons. The popular culture has changed. The mass media have changed attitudes in this country. They've educated a lot of Americans. Our polling shows that among young, the difference between older Americans and younger Americans on attitudes toward homosexuality is remarkable. A majority of people under the age of 30 support same-sex marriage, which is pretty astounding. So you look at where we've come, you look at the fact that in 1992, Bill Clinton was the first presidential candidate to never ever advocate positions favorable to gays and lesbians in any substantial way, and he won 72% of the gay and lesbian vote, according to the Voter News Survey exit polling. Now that's the exit polling company that works for the three networks, CNN and AP. So the numbers are not cooked, these are legitimate numbers. 72% voted for Bill Clinton in 1992. In 1996, there was a fall off. As Rich alluded to earlier, a dissatisfaction in the community with Don't Ask, Don't Tell, with the fact that he signed the Defense of Marriage Act toward the end of that session of Congress, resulted in disenchantment in the community. Not only did turnout fall off, but the percentage dropped to 66%. It's still within the range, as Rich talked about, of 25 to 32 or 34% of the gay and lesbian vote that seems to be Republican, and about 2/3 that tends to vote Democratic. Now, it wasn't always this way. Prior to Bill Clinton sort of capturing the imagination of the gay and lesbian voter, there was a stronger parity between the two if you go back over the years, because the Democrats, unfortunately, I have to admit, as a lifelong Democrat, have not always been champions of tolerance either. In particular, those of us from the South appreciate the fact that our Democrats could talk the fundamentalist line as well as anyone. But you look at what's happened in the intervening years. Not only has the wedge switched in the other direction, and that's not a perfect analysis, but it has happened to the point that certainly it's affecting presidential politics today. The fact that we're in a situation in 2000 where the two leading Democratic candidates for president competed for the gay and lesbian vote. And I can't tell you how many strategy sessions I went through where the question was not how do we avoid the gay and lesbian community, it was how do we attract their votes? What do they care about? It's the most remarkable thing I've ever been through in my life, I have to admit, traveling with the vice president around the country and meeting people in their communities, listening to them. We went to Iowa last December, and we met with 300 gays and lesbians in Iowa. They'd come from farms and small towns, from rural America. It wasn't the East Coast, West Coast type of gay and lesbian crowd that many of us are familiar with. Very different. A lot of people who had children. There were parents there with their teenage kids. I met a Lutheran minister and his partner who had been together 50 years and lived in a little town on the Mississippi River and had driven over for the evening. Allegedly, it was the largest gathering of gays and lesbians in Iowa outside of a gay bar in the history of the state. But it was truly a remarkable evening as we listened to their concerns and the things they dealt with on a daily basis in small-town America. Now, interestingly, we showed up for the event with the national media in tow and expected it to be just like any other town hall meeting we do, and they said, no, you can't have cameras in here. And it really was a time warp for many of us who had forgotten that in much of America it's still like that. So we had an audio feed, but not a video. So no one could see the people in the room, but they could hear the questions. And I think that was testament to the challenge that many Americans still face outside of the big cities. Well, obviously the gay and lesbian issues played a major role in the primary fight in the Democratic Party. We're in a situation now where in the 5 months remaining, 5 months from tomorrow, when we elect our next president, the gay and lesbian vote will play a significant role. How significant will it be? Let's take a look at some statistics. As Senator Simpson said, 5% of the vote in 1996 told exit pollsters they were gay or lesbian. When I briefed the vice president on that, he said, and probably the 5% that protested the loudest was also gay, so it's probably really 10%. And that may well be the case. We don't know what the hidden number is. Interestingly enough, in the California primary on March 11th, I guess it was, March 7th, with the Knight Initiative on the ballot, 11% of the voters in the California Democratic primary told exit pollsters they're gay or lesbian, which is phenomenal. It was higher than the African American vote in California. That got the attention of everyone in the Democratic Party, I can tell you that. I heard about it around the DNC within a few hours. So getting back to the point about votes and money making a difference, that is happening every day in terms of the role of the gay and lesbian vote in the Democratic Party. We just saw a poll, we didn't do it, that was done by Lou Harris, completed a week before last, that asked gay and lesbian Americans who they would support for president if the election were held today. 75% said Al Gore, 23% said George W. Bush, and 2% were undecided, a very small undecided number. Needless to say, we're quite happy with that. That is even slightly higher than Bill Clinton received in 1992. Why is that? It is because I think there are clear lines drawn between the two major presidential candidates in terms of their positions on gay and lesbian issues. We're not here tonight to debate the relative positions of the two candidates, but to suffice it to say that we believe that meeting with a few hand-picked individuals down in Austin did not suffice for addressing the needs, the interests, the legitimate concerns of the millions of Americans who are gay or lesbian. And in fact, I think it was kind of shameful that Governor Bush did not meet with Rich and with the leadership of the Log Cabin Republicans, who after all have been the people who have been doing the hard work day in and day out, trying to help elect congressional candidates, senatorial candidates, and make a difference in the Republican Party. Where are we going? Briefly, I'll just say I think that we're on the cusp of a significant new role in presidential politics. I think we're being institutionalized within the Democratic Party as we sit here. The reality is there are gays and lesbians being elected to office all over the country. We now have I guess it's sort of a paltry number, only 180 elected officials out of some 500,000 around the country, but we do have openly gay and lesbian members of some 25 state legislatures now, and that is significant. When you're sitting in the room with someone and they know you're gay or they know you're lesbian, it makes it a lot harder for them to do something to you they shouldn't be doing. So the reality is that things are changing rapidly. We are in a situation where, certainly within the Democratic Party, and I believe within the Republican Party under Rich's leadership, we're going to be seen as a group that is like any other group of Americans. We have a set of needs, a set of interests, things that need to be addressed, and we can debate over the best way to reach them. But what's not debatable is whether we exist as legitimate, full citizens of this country and have a right to full participation in the process.
We have 2 microphones, and if you could come forward and just give your name and ask any question you wish to either one of the panelists or both. And are those, Joao, are those, you can take those off, can you, and run around with them? Joao takes care of everything. He's managed to keep me in microphones. All right, yes, please.
Hello, is this working? Hello, my name is Carla Schack, and I don't want to drag the discussion off topic, but you introduced this by saying that we were talking about the highest levels of government, and I wanted to know what the panelists' opinions were on the lower levels of government. Just recently, in this last week, I believe it was Cheryl Jackas, one of the state senators in the Massachusetts legislature, came out as a lesbian. It was a very big step for us within the state Senate. And even lower on town boards and school boards and such, what do you think the importance is of people starting small and being open about themselves, even at the lower levels of offices, as they work up?
Would you both like to address that?
I'll jump in quickly and just say that, first of all, the single most powerful thing anyone ever does is come out, as many of us know, and no matter what level of government or station you are in life. But it's very important. That's the farm system. Tammy Baldwin, who is now a member of Congress, started out running for the Dane County Board of Supervisors in Wisconsin in 1992, and she was one of the first candidates that the Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund supported. We probably raised $2,000 for her and thought we'd done a great job. But that made a difference in that local race, county race. And she moved on to the legislature and eventually to Congress. But by the fact that the community helped her, we started her on the ladder, and that's terribly important.
I would echo that. I live in Washington, D.C. We have an openly gay Republican city councilor, and I can say of all the people I've ever helped get elected, it's the only one that's ever impacted my life directly in a positive way. We actually, the city's running better, and on gay issues, he's a champion. But what quickly happens is the gay issue becomes secondary to their merit and their expertise. And just in my own personal life, I managed a campaign in 1990 for Mike Duffy, who ran in the South End here, Boston, and that race we lost. But that race got me really involved with log cabin Republicans. I just had lunch today with the senior policy advisor to the governor, who was our treasurer, Abner Mason. So, I mean, things come out of those campaigns that you never expect either. So I think it's obvious, it's the best, it's the best way is do it from the grassroots up.
Question?
I'm Alex Lloyd, an undergraduate at Harvard. You guys have talked a lot about the inroads gays and lesbians are making into, especially national and to some extent state and local politics. And I'm wondering to what extent, if any, this is an indication of social shifts in the population at large and their attitude towards gays and lesbians. Or I saw the Times of Harvey Milk recently, and there are obviously cases where gays and lesbians can make tremendous, powerful inroads into politics, and it's very disjoint with the social opinions going on at the same time.
Would you each like to address that?
Sure, I think it's definitely social changes. The question is what changed, what happened socially and what changed. I think in politics, I think the senator alluded to this in the opening comments. It's not necessarily the moral high ground that moves politicians all the time. They are probably far ahead in support of gay rights if you talk to politicians privately. It's what they'll say is, I'll get creamed in my district if I do X, Y, or Z, or whatever you want. It's too early, or don't push. So they believe they're ahead, personally ahead of the culture. But a lot of the polling shows that the culture is, right now, it's up to 80% almost of people who say people shouldn't be fired because they're gay or lesbian. That's probably the most dramatic increase of the social issue over this whole decade. And your statistic about gay marriage, which 2 years ago we said, oh God, don't bring that up because we'll get creamed on that issue. You're in the Freedom of Marriage Coalition. That's a tough issue for us. The fact is that by debating marriage, we're now talking in real terms about domestic partnerships everywhere. So I think that the fact that people have come out this decade, I was just recently talking to my niece who told me her favorite show was Will and Grace. That she's in college and the coolest thing for her is that all of her 5 of her male friends are gay, and that's really cool, and they're cool. And so the culture has dramatically changed too. So I think actually the politicians are catching up, and corporate America is far ahead of politicians too. Over a majority of the Fortune 500 companies have non-discrimination policies.
I think that's right. The culture is changing rapidly. As with any social change, it will happen more rapidly in some areas than the other. We know the military will drag along on this one; it will be tougher. But even look at athletics. Look at Corey Johnson here in Massachusetts, the 18-year-old high school football player who came out and was very well received in his own high school, and has sort of become a national hero in part because in the athletic culture, which is one of the most difficult for anyone to come out in, I say being an old basketball player, that will be one of the last areas, and you know that. But attitudes are changing every day, and I think that as much as we like to take credit through the political process, the reality is that in many ways we're following. We're not leading. We're following the fact that Americans are learning that their neighbors, their sons and daughters, their parents, their aunts and uncles are gay or lesbian, and they say, well, what's a big deal? You mean you can get fired from a job for that? Well, I can't support that.
I promised I wouldn't add anything, but here's one I have to add. After the Matthew Shepard issue, it happened during the football season in the fall, and then there was a homecoming parade, and 600 more people joined the homecoming parade with a logo. I don't know if it's a national. It's a logo. It looks like the monad, which is green and yellow, and it means tolerance toward gays and lesbians. And the football team, the University of Wyoming Cowboys, put that logo on their helmet. They weren't asked to do that, and here's a stereotypical homophobic crew, and they wore that, and they play on national television, and the announcer was saying, what's this yellow and green logo on the back about this big? And they said that is a gay lesbian awareness or sensitivity. That was very interesting to see. There's part of what is happening. Here's one of my fine students. Yes, go ahead, in my class.
Thank you, Senator Simpson. We just couldn't let you go without scheduling another forum. We'd love to convince you to stay. I'm Sarah Hamlin. I'm co-chairing the Gay and Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgendered Caucus here, so welcome to the panelists and to our fabulous large audience. I would like to ask you about the ballot propositions that you see have been put on the ballot in California in the primary. A number of us were working to try and defeat that measure. There was extraordinary polarization, particularly when we talked to our colleagues in the African American community on the religious grounds about same-sex marriage. I'm interested in your take about the fall ballot measures. Where do you see the battleground states? Where do you see whether the major parties, candidates will intervene, or will there be sort of a two-tiered struggle over banning gay marriage while various candidates are trying to be more open talking to gays and lesbians? So I'd like to hear your perspective.
Would you each respond to that? Unless someone directs the question directly at one of the panelists, we'll just have you, since you're doing a fine job, briefly responding. You both get to kick in.
Okay. Coalition building is terribly important. Whether you're 5% or 7% or 8%, it's a long way to 51%. And there's probably nothing more important in our community than to build those bridges. And I think the Prop 22 in California was a classic case of that. And I think it's the lesson there is that has to be done state by state, city by city. And we're going to lose some referenda, some of the initiatives. There's no question, because the religious right knows how to frame questions in a way that makes it virtually impossible for people to vote against. But I think we have to keep our eye on the long term, on the big picture. We're winning, and we're going to win. And despite a few setbacks like California. Certainly in terms of the fall election, for the Gore campaign, we're definitely targeting gay and lesbian voters in key states. We have specific field operatives who work with the gay and lesbian community. It's part of our plan. It's just as much as any other voter is in the country is being targeted. We will have a complete outreach program to the community.
And just my experience with ballot initiatives has been, while we greatly fear them, especially the DOMA type state bills that have been all over the country, while we fear them, my experience is that the fact that the religious right is pushing DOMA bills is a very good sign for us. It means they've conceded a lot of ground if they're going to fight on marriage. And I occasionally do debates on talk shows and with some of the religious right, and they won't debate me about employment or anything else anymore. They want to talk about marriage, because they feel like that's the only issue they have left. That's a very good sign. What I've also discovered in those DOMA debates that I've participated in is, usually with religious right folks, they will concede domestic partners by the end of the debate. Well, I wouldn't want to get, we're against marriage, but giving you insurance and giving you the right to have, for some of those things, those are legal issues. So it was the word marriage. So I think that the gay and lesbian community should not be afraid of those ballot initiatives, even when they look negative. I mentioned I was in a campaign here, we lost, and yet I've seen dramatic effects from that loss. I just recently met with a guy named Tim Gill, who has a Quark software company in Colorado, and he's given more money to the gay, he's gay, he's given more to gay organizations than any other person in the country, millions and millions of dollars. I asked, what mobilized you? He said, Colorado's ballot initiative. It woke me up. Colorado lost, if you remember, had to go to the Supreme Court. But the point is, whether it feels like we're going to sometimes lose, and sometimes these are really tough battles. In the long run, they're playing on our field. They're putting these forward because they're conceding a lot of ground. So I don't see it as a loss. I think at the presidential level, they'll stay away from them, frankly, at the local level, as best they can.
Question here.
My name is Mark. I'm a former student here. My question relates to what you were saying about how in the 1990s you've seen gay issues become more mainstream, becoming more of a centrist issue. Whereas something I've seen, certainly in my industry, I work in textbooks, is the social conservative backlash. Whereas before you had people who may have been more passively hostile, now you seem to have more people who are taking aggressive stance and campaigning on that. I guess my question is, where do you see this going? How much of this is simply in the media, people grabbing the microphone at rallies, and how much of this is actually playing out in politics, and what do you see as the future?
I guess my take on it would be that in your industry, the textbook industry, you've watched the rise of social conservatives come in to edit books. What I've seen in politics, my experience, and I'm sure Senator Simpson could comment on this too, my experience is that the religious right in the Republican Party in many ways reached their high point probably at the 92 convention. I haven't seen them as powerful. And now when I see interviews of people in the religious right, and I do not think of them monolithically, people are very complicated. So there's not just one group out there, people are just sort of bigoted people that hate gays. They looked outside of their window and they saw a decay in their society. They saw decay in their morals. Their kids weren't being told right and wrong, and things were looking. There was moral relativism taking over, and they were worried about it. And someone said, "What is it caused by? It's caused by the homosexuals. They're the group that's leading the charge." Frankly, that was the boogeyman. That was one of the groups that was blamed for this moral decay, and so they bought into it. I don't think they're buying into it as much, and I think they've been very disappointed with politics in general. So that's why it's different than the textbook industry, where I think they could have more impact in parental controls at the local level, because politics, absolutely, you must compromise. These folks Jesus has whispered in her ear, they are going to do this. Jeannie Austin, the former co-chair of the Republican National Committee, who just recently died of cancer, I met with her one time, and she was telling me that a religious right candidate was running against her. And the reason the candidate was running against her was Jesus had whispered into her ear, run against Jeannie Austin. She's not conservative enough. And so, this opponent got 2% of the vote in Florida for the state committee. And Jeannie Austin said, I couldn't resist calling her, saying, darling, maybe Jesus whispered in your ear, but he didn't tell the voters. And I think what that leads that person, for example, I think they're very disenchanted with politics. In the Republican primary season, something really dramatic happened. First of all, a lot of her religious right joined the George Bush thing because they thought he could win some, like the Pat Robertsons. Huge compromise. Others went with Keyes, not much of a compromise for them. He was pre-aligned. Gary Bauer was their candidate. But at the Christian Coalition Conference, Pat Robertson said, do not support Bauer, support Bush. We must learn to compromise. That doesn't work when you have God's truth. And Gary's saying it, and Alan is saying it. And so some of them took a huge leap of compromise and supported Steve Forbes, who changed all his positions from 4 years earlier and tried to be a social conservative. None of them got any traction. And so now what you have are people who have really stretched their pragmatism in the George W. Bush race. Yeah. I think we're going to see, if whatever happens, if Bush wins or loses, I think social conservatives who invested all this time and effort in the Republican Party are going to feel really used at the end of this election cycle, and I think even less likely to be politically involved.
I think Rich is right. I think the struggle within the Republican Party is where the action is right now. Having the majority leader of the United States Senate say that we are kleptomaniacs can't endear him to a lot of the gay and lesbian Republicans. It certainly doesn't to any Democrats, I can tell you that. But it is not acceptable today within the Democratic Party or any meetings I have been in or any caucuses anywhere to express anything other than pro-gay positions. You can argue over methodology and whether or not you push one issue or another, and certainly same-sex marriage is something nobody wants to go near yet. But even there are those who are willing to speak up. So the world has changed dramatically. And I would just cite, again, going back to the poll, because I always like to look at the numbers, again, this is the Harris poll done last month. 18% of gay and lesbian American voters consider themselves Republicans, compared to 30% of all American voters. 38% of gay and lesbian Americans consider themselves Democrats, compared to 34% of all Americans. 41% of gays and lesbians consider themselves independents, as opposed to 34% of all adults. I think it's interesting that the Republican Party leadership, the Trent Watts of the world, have driven a lot of people out of the Republican Party. And, I guess I should be parochial and say thank you, because we, in the Gore campaign, are the beneficiary of that. But if Rich succeeds in what he's been trying to do, one day we'll be in a 50-50 range, where we're both fighting for voters tooth and nail.
Question here.
Hi, I'm Steve Holichuk, and I think it's important that we have on our radar that some of us are still struggling and finding life harder. Some of us are working class and poor. And I'd like to briefly mention two situations and then have both speakers respond to how their parties could offer hope, and how, if you come back 4 years from now, how people in these situations might find their lives somewhat better. A realistic response, not pie in the sky. But my former partner of 12 years worked in a blue-collar plant for 17 years. And recently was subjected to a plant closing. And what was really good about the plant is he was out there, out as a gay man. It became a very supportive environment. Went to a new job, is taking home $100 less a week, and he wasn't making great money at the former job. He has a mortgage and car payments. So he's a guy who's experiencing disillusionment and a lot of stress. So that's one scenario. And I think a lot of us are, in those blue-collar situations, and I think it's a part of the community that maybe isn't the most visible. Another scenario is a lot of gay and lesbian, bi, and trans people have disabilities, live on SSI. It's a fact that in any housing market in the United States, you cannot rent a studio apartment with an SSI check. It doesn't provide you with enough income. So here's two very concrete situations. I'd like to hear something of hope and even incremental improvement if either of your candidates win. Where will we be in 4 years for people like these two situations?
Thank you very much.
Briefly, let me just say that I think you raise a good point. The Vice President met with the leadership of the Stonewall Democrats, which is a new federation of local gay and lesbian democratic clubs around the country. And these clubs include a lot of blue-collar gay and lesbian voters, and that was very instructive, I have to admit, even for me. And I thought I knew a lot about the community, but I listened to a lot of people who do work in manufacturing jobs and elsewhere talk about the issues they face, and we were struck by it. I mean, we met for 2 hours with them, and one of the things which certainly they emphasized is employment issues are terribly important. ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, is something that would be important to them. The issue of domestic partner benefits, the right to health insurance, survivorship with pensions are all things that are important. The Vice President made a commitment to set up a task force, if he is elected, to look at these issues and to make recommendations about what should be put in place for a domestic partnership program. And that is a specific commitment that came out of that meeting and listening to those concerns.
And to your first point about being blue collar, I always have to laugh because people have this impression of gay Republicans being very wealthy, and we have grassroots chapters all over the country, and we increased our dues this last year, and it was it was $15 a person to $40, and it was the most dramatic debate we've ever had on anything. But because, and I'm not making light of it, I'm just saying what the reality is. The community is very diverse, and in fact, some people like to say we're wealthier than we are, and others like to say that there's a report out now by Glass, a policy institute, that has shown that we are disproportionately, that they argue, less financially well off than the general public. And when I look at the David Geffens and the Andy Tobias events in Washington all the time, where I see millions and millions of dollars going to the Democratic Party, I always have to laugh when I attend forums and people say, "You're the party of the rich." And I say, "Where are these people?" I don't know any of these people. But so I think your first point is well taken. To your second point, I think you raise a broader point, which is that the gay voter is not a single-issue voter, and that's a myth. And that is why George Bush's numbers are 25%, and he hasn't done much of outreach to the gay and lesbian community. That means that people are looking at a variety of issues. And to answer your question, the solutions to whatever the issues are, there are generally government solutions, and there are generally free market solutions to those sort of problems. And whichever one you believe in, that'll be your party. I think the Democratic Party would say this and that program, or a program to solve that would do it. Just giving you a program, whereas the Republican candidate might have other alternative solutions depending on the situation. I think both sides of the debate believe whatever they're doing is compassionate. I worked for Governor Weld when he, in his first term as adolescent health director, and we implemented major changes in Medicaid, and the social service community totally protested us, but I think at the end of the day, we increased adolescent health for the state. But they were both sides debating how do you best accomplish it. I think the goal that what Jeff is getting at is someday we could have this debate and both candidates will be fighting for the gay vote. You are witnessing that. You are by living in Massachusetts, which I assume most of you live in Massachusetts right now, you're living in a state that is a model for the rest of the country for gay, lesbian rights. You have Senate campaigns and governor campaigns where the candidates say, no, I'm more gay supportive, no, I'm more gay supportive, no, I'm more gay supportive. And that is, to the rest of the country, it's, when I'm organizing clubs in Texas, that is a baffling concept to them. You have a situation where the candidates are fighting over who is more gay supportive. But that model that you've created here is a very, very good model. One of the reasons, to an earlier question, why we've advanced, I think, is because we're competed for. But ultimately, you'll decide what you think solutions each candidate will give. And I can't speak for George W. Bush, nor could I obviously speak for Al Gore. They'll offer you solutions. But what I'd like to see is the day when we don't have to focus on simply the gay issue. We can focus on our other issues of concern, and because we're not monolithic either as a community, we're all multi-issue.
Thank you.
Here, sir.
My question is actually for Mr. Taffel. I have two identities that make me a numerical minority in this country. One more obvious than the other. I won't say which one that is. But those dual identities are I think they're essential to who I am as a person, and I make very few decisions that aren't in some way influenced directly or either indirectly by those identities and how the world responds to me that way. Last summer I was watching the Log Cabin National Conference, and you were there and a few other elected officials, and all the Republican officials that were speaking, to the number, each said that his sexual identity or gayness was not relevant to his role in public office, and that it wasn't essential to what he does or how he works. And one person went on to, in response to your question about who accepts you more, the Democrats or Republicans, he responded that he was embraced by Republicans, and he pointed to his record of voting against a lot of issues that are identified as gay-friendly. In addition to that, there are other Republicans, I think prominent Republicans, who've gone on record saying they oppose ENDA. So my question, considering the impact of the gay vote in 2000, considering those prominent Republicans' stance that their sexuality is not relevant to their public life, and considering a lot of opposition to policies that I think are positive or have a positive impact on our community, what would be the impact of a candidate that's elected with a gay Republican vote if gay Republicans don't feel that their sexuality is relevant to their life or don't demand change or policies that are going to have a positive impact on our community?
I think where those candidates were coming from, and I think you got it a little bit wrong. I don't think any of them said they supported anti-gay policies, and that's how they won Republican support. I'm sure they didn't say that. I know the panel you're talking about in New York. But what they said was, and I think this is the goal of all people, and all, particularly gay people, I don't think any of us want to be cartooned. I don't want someone to know I'm gay and immediately think they know about me. And I experience it all the time in prejudice and working in the Republican Party and dealing with social conservatives. They know one factor about me, and they think they know a lot. But I've experienced the exact same thing within the gay community. When they know I'm a Republican, I get charged for one thing, being told I've got lots of money, which I'm still looking for. But I come from a wealthy family. I've heard all these things, and you get tarred with a lot of. We like to cartoon. We like to label and cartoon people. And I think what the candidates and what the elected officials were saying is the way they've really educated people about the gay and lesbian community is that they do fix the potholes. They do make sure that the city is running more effectively where they live. They have made they are successful. And what was once a big deal, they were the gay candidate. They were all complaining. I wish I was the mayor of Plattsburgh, New York, not the gay. Every article being the gay mayor of Plattsburgh, New York. It gets a little tiring. They were saying I'm more complex than that. Not that I'm ashamed of being gay, because obviously these are all openly gay people who ran openly gay races. But they don't want to be cartooned. They want to be seen for the broader issues that they support.
Question, please.
Thank you, gentlemen, for showing up. I'm Cherise Sebastian. I'm a local transgender activist in the GLBT community. First, an editorial comment. Considering the theocratical reactionaries' absolute reticence to run in the opposite direction, where any sort of instruction involving health education and responsible participation in relationships is involved, since when did it become society's responsibility to teach ethics and social responsibility? But my question is directed towards Mr. Taffel and Mr. Trammell. What assurances can you give this audience that after the election, and particularly for Mr. Trammell, that there will still be support, whoever is voted into president, for the GLBT community, and particularly the transgender community? Because, for example, Mr. Gore's playing to the theocratical reactionaries in order to support government funding for religious education in the parochial schools.
Well, I guess one thing you learn in politics, beyond the fact that you can't make everybody happy, is that you get attacked from the right and the left at the same time. And the reality is that Vice President Gore has gone on record, has gone further in terms of supporting issues for the gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered communities, and he has used that phrase. The only person to ever run for president I know of, maybe Bill Bradley used it as well, but he has used the full term, I mean, all four initials, GLBT or LGBT. So I think that is extremely significant. And you look at the issues he's dealt with, and you look at the dozens of meetings he's held around the country with the community. I sat in one meeting in New York. I thought I knew a lot about the community, but I sat in with a meeting with him in New York, and until you have dealt with every diverse group in our community in New York City, you have no idea what diversity is. We dealt with the gay Gray Panthers from Queens who are interested in housing for gay seniors. We dealt with transgendered youth. We dealt with, it was an education. But Vice President Gore sat there for 3 hours and listened. Now, does he have every answer? No. And he will tell you he doesn't have every answer. But his level of commitment to our community is long-standing, and I would say that of his wife is maybe even longer-standing. And she's always a very staunch advocate for those who are from a minority sexual orientation. So I would just say that there are no certainties in politics. Politics is the art of the possible. But his commitment is there, and if he gets a Congress that will work with him, I think a lot of progress can be made. And specifics, he's committed to the Domestic Partnership Task Force. He's committed to hate crimes, to trying to reverse gays in the military, although that takes an act of Congress. So I think on any number of issues, he's been there and will be there.
Thank you.
I can be real quick. Anybody who's followed any of this knows that I can't speak for the Bush campaign, so I couldn't promise anything on their behalf. But I would echo what Jeff says, which is you push for what you can get, and you go as far as you can, and then it's a gamble, regardless of who you support afterward. There's no guarantees, and you will be betrayed at some point.
Question here, please. Oh, yeah. There's another one of my fine student.
Actually, Senator, when I walked in, I thought it was a makeup class for your course. Then I saw Mickey Edwards. I knew it couldn't be so. But
Yes, Mickey's not in my class.
no, I didn't think so. I'm Suzanne Smith, just finishing up the mid-career program here. One of the things that I enjoyed this year, being at the Kennedy School, was that my partner was eligible for health insurance. When I return back to my job next week in the federal government, that won't be so. That's going to be a tough thing to take. The reason that change will take place is because of the attitudes of Harvard University and the city of Cambridge and the state of Massachusetts. That attitude hasn't percolated up to the federal level. I'm curious about your perspectives on why this civil rights movement appears to be different than others, in that much of the change seems to come from the bottom up. Certainly, in the civil rights struggle in the 60s, much of the change occurred first at the federal level and then moved down. I'm interested in why you think that is so, and then on a personal level, what will it take to have federal civil rights changes occur that will allow me to have my partner back on that health insurance policy? Thanks.
I think the reason that we are a grassroots-driven community is in large part because we are a less sympathetic community to the national consciousness. During the struggle for desegregation and civil rights based on race in the 60s and 70s, the American public saw Selma. They saw St. Augustine and Albany and Philadelphia, Mississippi, and their conscience was pricked, and they felt something. It took Matthew Shepard for the national conscience to be stirred, and that's about all we've had, fortunately, because we don't want more Matthew Shepards. But I think we are seen all too often as people who want special rights, maybe a little self-indulgent, maybe, all of the stereotypes that are out there. I don't think we have done a good job as a community explaining who we are. And the basic things we want are what everybody else wants. And that, yes, life is very difficult for gay and lesbian bisexual and transgender teenagers in this country. If you want to talk about where the pain and the difficulty is for in our community, much of it is in growing up. So any of it, I don't think we've done a good job of that. I think that's the reason there's not a lot of sort of sympathy at the top levels. And I think as our elected officials have become more educated, they have developed, let people like Alan Simpson, as they learned about the community and they knew someone personally, that translated into positions and policies. Your other question about domestic partner benefits in the federal government, it's something that's certainly on our radar screen. We've had meetings within the campaign about that very topic, and it's something that if Vice President Gore is elected, that will be part of that task force.
I'm not an expert on the civil rights movement, but my experience of American politics and my understanding of history is that almost all change percolate up. And I think if you think about it, the Emancipation Proclamation, we're talking 100 years later when we hear about people like Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. In the interim period, there were people fighting constantly. They get a lot of the attention, people who are at the end, but I don't think we can say that Lyndon Johnson was far ahead of the country and was driving the nation ahead. I think the nation was pulled by the grassroots, and obviously by the stuff that happened visually and nationally. But I think our organization, for example, is created to be a grassroots organization because I firmly believe that things percolate from the grassroots up. When you go into a senator's office, the first question they ask you is, how does that play in my district? And if you try to get a meeting by yourself, it's a 50-50 chance, but if you come in with someone from the district, it's almost 100% chance because politics percolates up. So I think that the gay movement would be unwise to focus on a federal strategy, which I think we have too much to this point. We focused nationally. And I think that the focus, frankly, when I see national groups come into local cities, take the money and put it in Washington and say, we're going to lobby for you, I think it's destined to be more of a PR campaign than effective change. Real change will come when they come into your city, raise money for you locally, make the changes locally, and then we can say, look, in Massachusetts, we did a gay youth commission. We had the Republican governor signed this. Now we can show someone else. And eventually, I think the last place that will change will be the federal government. And I think we shouldn't worry about it. The other dangerous things, if we could, by a wand, change things at the federal government level, we would see a huge backlash if we haven't brought the public with us on these issues. And that would be even more dangerous in the long run, I think.
Question, please.
Hi, my name is Bob Mitchell, and as I was sitting here listening to everything, I began to think of my Aunt Ruth and my Uncle Al. A couple in their 60s, they never miss an election, they wave the flag on Memorial Day, they always vote. And the gay vote, it is important. We vote, we do impact politics. Obviously, people support that vote. I don't think that's an issue. The issue that came to mind as we were discussing this is Bill Clinton in 1992 took a step that showed his leadership when he came out on the gay issue in the military. That's what leadership is about. He didn't get what he wanted, but he made a bold statement, and it started dialogue. Look at this discussion that came out of that, and all of a sudden we're talking about all of these different things. When you do something to demonstrate your leadership, you don't always win the first battle. And he got elected again. And obviously all of these people, or enough people voted for him and cared about him. They knew he still had the same ideas vis-a-vis the gay world, the gay vote, etc. So my question is, how important, if a politician stands up today and says, I'm for gay rights, or I'm for the Defense of Marriage Act, I'm for gay marriages, etc. How much of an impact does that really have on them becoming elected? I mean, how much does the electorate care about that relative to taxes and good schools and roads and defense, things like that? Because that's really how I tend to vote. Those things are very important. So how important is it? How much will it impact a politician if they come up and make a bold statement and support gay and lesbian rights?
Well, I can talk about in the Republican Party where I think that's, as you said, it's sort of the front lines where we're seeing some dramatic changes. And I can say at the beginning of the decade, working with Republicans, it really was courageous for them to meet with me in their office. I mean, that was the level of, my gosh, we're meeting with him, and staff had debate about whether I should even be able to come and meet with representatives. That's how frightening it was. And then when they found out I wasn't selling log cabin syrup, it was even more fun. And that was always the question. Oh, we don't have syrup in our district. They don't ask that question anymore. They don't ask about syrup anymore. They know exactly what log cabin is. And the difference now is the Republicans most in jeopardy, I can talk at the federal level, are mainly moderate swing districts. And those Republicans now, instead of being fearful of a group like Log Cabin, are saying, Rich, we need you to get out there and say we're not what the Democrats are calling us. Because the Democrats' biggest weapon now is to call every Republican a Trent Lott Republican, a Jesse Helms Republican. And in swing districts, I'm talking about in places like New England, in California, in the Midwest, and in a lot of cities in the South, they want to be inoculated. So working with the gay and lesbian community now is a sign that they're inoculated. The New York Senate race is interesting to me because I know Rick Lazio, the congressman who's running, and he's very much a moderate, very friendly on gay issues. But immediately the campaign, first things they did was start calling him a right-wing. Yes, he looks like he's socially liberal, but he's really not. He's really a Newt Gingrich Republican. They're bringing Newt Gingrich back in the Senate race in New York. And so the Lazio campaign is saying, get the word out there that we've worked with you for years. So we can't be what they say we are. So I think that's the impact, because your aunt and your uncle, for the variety of issues they hear, one thing that might really turn them off is the image that the Republican they might like is intolerant. And that Democrats know that, and that's why you're going to see, I think that the Gore campaign against Bush is going to be very much focused on he's a risky candidate. He'll put in social conservatives to the Supreme Court, and he'll turn the clock back on social issues. And I think that's the attack.
There you go. We've been so restrained all evening.
You've been waiting.
I have bitten my tongue. No, I won't remind everyone that Governor Bush did say that Justice Scalia was his role model in terms of the first appointment he will make to the Supreme Court, or that he said that he would oppose any repeal in state sodomy laws because they reflect traditional American values, which probably makes a lot of people in this room felons. But I would never make that statement or repeat it.
You're going to have to deal with it.
The reality is, as Rich said, the world has changed. It's turned upside down. The wedge is working in the other direction now. And it is true that we do try to level those charges of intolerance against Republicans, because I believe that a lot of very good American citizens who are moderate Republicans are turned off by the rhetoric. They don't like the face of Tom DeLay and Trent Lott on their party. And I think that it does hurt Republicans in marginal districts, and it's certainly something the Democrats will, in the interest of the public good, try to point out. But I think it's testament to how much the world is changing. And again, I don't want to sound unduly optimistic, but I think we all should take a moment to appreciate and recognize what is happening around us. And the fact that people in the mainstream now are turned off by intolerant rhetoric. One brief anecdote, my mom was telling me that in the small town she lives in North Florida, where almost everyone's a Southern Baptist, except for her, she's a liberal because she's a Methodist, that one of her friends from the Baptist church came up to her the other day and said, I saw Jeff on TV. I was on the O'Reilly Factor debating gay issues with Bill O'Reilly. And she said, I didn't know he was... And there was this long pause, which my mom didn't know that she was going to say. And she said, for Gore. And my mom said, probably in her Southern Baptist mind, being for Gore was worse than being gay. So we still have some work to do.
Well, the time has come to conclude, but boy, there's a message here you don't want to miss from a guy who's been in politics a long time. Politics is goofy stuff. But let me give you the definition I give my class. In politics, there are no right answers, only a continuing flow of compromises among groups, resulting in a changing, cloudy, and ambiguous series of public decisions where appetite and ambition compete openly with knowledge and wisdom. That's all there is. And let me tell you, you have to start at the grassroots. And another one I forgot to tell you, you remember the Marine that was outed from the White House 5-10 years ago? You remember he was on the honor guard, and he was well, I can't remember his name, sadly enough, but it was a very important cause at the time, and I met him at some event, and he said, "I'm coming in to see you. I'm from Cheyenne." Now that'll wake you up. and this is the key. You get that family with the farmer from Powell, Wyoming, whose son is gay, that they know who's on the county commission. The father's on the county commission. And take that guy to Washington with you in every district. That's the way it works. And it's awesome. But they're both right. If you think you're going to get anything good starting at the top with the feds, where you won't make that. And I just share that. But one of the things that happened at the San Diego convention after the disaster at Houston was that huge sign. You couldn't get to the convention, the Republican convention, without going past this sign. And it was longer than this room, and it said, there was a huge number of people, every race, sex, gender, and it said, not one among us does not have a friend or relative who is gay or lesbian. And they had to walk past that. Even Jesse had to walk past that. And Newt. And I think that's the key. It's a critical thing. But I want to thank two very impressive activist citizens who know the game. They know politics. And politics, they know it well. And it works. And I always say to people, if you don't like partisanship or politics, move to a country where they don't have any. And then write me a letter and tell me how much fun you're having in 6 months. So on behalf of the Institute of Politics, these fine people, Andre, Christian, thank you so much for a wonderful, ranging and wonderful program. Thank you all for coming. Be here and have fun with Peter Gomes. Get some talks about Ronald Reagan. Sure.